Monday morning. This is America's Morning News, where the nation's news breaks on this 21st day of November. I'm Matt Ray. Here's what we're following this morning. Even before Donald Trump chooses a Supreme Court nominee, the new president can take steps to make several contentious court cases go away. Legal challenges involving immigration, climate change, cost-free contraceptive care, transgender rights, they all could be affected without any help from Congress. Let's bring in our guest this morning. Byron Henry is a legal expert, an appellate attorney, our go-to guy on Supreme Court cases. The website is solidcounsel.com. Hey, Byron, how are you on this Monday morning?
Great to be with you, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, as always. So these cases on Obama administration policies, they really rely on the president's pen, right?
That's true. There's two classes of cases we're talking about here. We're talking about executive orders, such as you'd have in the immigration cases where the president actually issued orders. And then you're also talking about regulatory agency cases, such as the transgender rights cases, which came out of a directive from the Department of Education. You've got the new overtime rules that are actually being heard by a judge down here in the Eastern District of Texas. He set the rule by the 22nd, by tomorrow, whether or not those changes in the law basically are going to go into effect on December 1. The state of Texas sued the Obama administration. So you've got overtime rules out of the Department of Labor. You've got the Department of Education issue. Then you've got the EPA, the big clean power push, which is the coal killing regulations that were entered. So you've got regulatory agency cases and you've got executive orders, but both are controlled by the president either directly or through his appointees to the heads of those agencies.
So obviously we have an even Supreme Court, if you will, just because of the vacancy. I mean, is this something that's common when we get a new commander in chief?
Yes, and in fact, there's been some stories recently, you may have seen them, where often it's usually quieter than it is this year because there wasn't that 4-4 split in those contentious empty seat on the Supreme Court. But lots of cases in the lower courts go away through because of executive order changes or changes in the department policy with respect to these cabinet-level agencies such as the EPA or the Education Department or the Labor Department. So that is common. These are just some very high-profile, highly contentious, some constitutional issues, such as the contraception case under Obamacare and a couple other cases that have gotten a lot of press this past year.
Yeah, and I would imagine, along with the cases involving the Republican-led states, I mean, I would think that those would probably go away first.
Probably, I think so. The one of the big ones was an Establishment Clause case where a church did not qualify for a grant to help build playgrounds because it's at a church school as opposed to a public school, and so that was a big case that a lot of court followers were watching. That case will probably also go away, though it's not based on Donald Trump's President-elect Donald Trump's pen. But the real issue is some of these. The biggest, I think, change will be in the EPA because there has been a sweeping change in law under the EPA, and that was an issue that Justice Kennedy was already siding with conservatives probably on the immigration issue because it split 4-4. He's already very skeptical of the Obamacare contraception rulings. If you counted your votes and saw there was a 4-4 split after Antonin Scalia died, which means he was probably siding with the conservatives on that case. So those are cases that Kennedy was already siding with the conservatives on. But the EPA cases are big because all those clean power regulations that went into effect that have been very close calls in the courts of appeals and whatnot that were making their way to the Supreme Court. Justice Kennedy almost always sided with Justice Scalia on the overreach of some of those regulations. So with a new appointee by Donald Trump, it's almost certain that a lot of those regulations and coal-killing regulations are probably going to be struck down, if not just outright changed under a Trump administration.
And I would imagine the timeline has to do with the docket.
That's correct. And believe me, the court is very aware of if and when it's going to get another justice. They have some ability to hold cases over for re-argument. They don't do it very often. They can also dismiss cases that's improvidently granted. Sometimes they grant cases and dismiss them if they don't have a full court. Or, of course, there could just be a 4-4 tie, and you'll have to wait for another case to percolate up through the system. And sometimes these cases don't fully come back up through the system for 2 or 3 more years, so you might actually have a completely different Supreme Court by the time they get back. But there are a few cases that Donald Trump could affect almost immediately that are coming up through the system, and we've already talked about those. Other than those, there's a lot of issues in the lower courts that had been started by states and individuals, but probably won't ever get all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Mitch McConnell's refusal to consider Merrick Garland paid off. The gamble paid off. What kind of timeline are we looking at there as far as President Trump getting the vacancy filled?
Well, as I've said in many interviews, all those conservatives that basically had Mitch McConnell on the naughty list for Christmas for some of the things that they were unhappy with him about, they owe him a huge apology. They should tweet it. They should text it, because he basically did a huge gamble for the Supreme Court, and it's one of the biggest political gambles in history. And he basically saved the Supreme Court for conservatives with that move. And I would think that you're looking at a Supreme Court nomination probably within the first 30 days of Trump's administration, and probably confirmation by towards the end of the Supreme Court term, probably I'm thinking maybe May or June. So it's unlikely that this justice would hear any of the current cases, but we'll just have to wait and see how fast the Senate moves, and if his first nominee gets attempted filibuster, or if there's some procedural mechanisms to try to block his first nominee. A lot of people are saying that's unlikely, since this nomination just replaces Justice Scalia and restores the court to the same balance it was before, that the real fight is going to be with the next nominee, but we'll just have to wait and see.
If we can sit around and pontificate, or the discussion that's going on with Donald Trump and his cabinet, is there any discussion of shortening that list that he had for the Supreme Court justices, do you think?
We've seen only some innuendo and rumor come out, and I don't think there's any basis for that. We see Ted Cruz floated as a possible Supreme Court justice, who is not even on the list that he said he would appoint from. So that was kind of a bizarre report, and then some reports that he would accept if it was offered to him, but nothing from the Donald Trump camp that he's added anyone or taken anyone off the list. There is speculation that Donald Trump is not afraid of a fight. Some reports that he doesn't mind nominating someone that is controversial to Democrats if he likes the person and thinks he's the right person or she's the right person for the job. He doesn't intend to change his pick based on the possibility that there could be a Senate fight. So we could be looking at one of the more controversial there's a few on his list that are more controversial than others, let's say, and we could be looking at him picking a fight early on in this next Congress with the Senate.
Byron Henry, legal expert, the website solidcounsel.com. Byron, we appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Matt.